When hope dies, legends are born. The Nexus Coalition had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years. Their marble towers stretched across 100 worlds, their fleets darkened the stars, and their laws crushed any species that dared resist. The Zolari, once proud warriors, now served as janitors in Coalition buildings. The Morthok, master engineers, built weapons they would never be allowed to use. The Vectani, with their ancient wisdom, had become nothing more than record keepers, for their oppressors died on the remote world of Kepler-4 for to be. Captain Marcus Kane stood in the observation deck of the Human Research Station. His weathered face reflected years of watching the galaxy burn while humanity remained hidden. Earth had discovered faster-than-light travel only 50 years ago. But they quickly learned the galaxy already had masters. The Coalition's message was clear: submit or be erased. Captain, we're receiving another distress signal, reported Lieutenant Zoe Park, her fingers dancing across the holographic interface. The signal came from the Sarah Prime, where the Coalition was conducting what they called population restructuring. Kane knew what that really meant. He had seen the reports, the videos smuggled out by desperate refugees. In the station's lower levels, Chief Engineer Roy Blackstone worked frantically on humanity's most ambitious project. The Phoenix-class destroyer sat in the construction bay, its hull gleaming with experimental armor plating that could absorb energy weapons. Unlike Coalition ships that relied on overwhelming firepower, human vessels were built around a different philosophy: adaptability and survival. Roy, status report. Kane called through the communicator. She's ready, Captain. All systems green. The quantum drive is responding perfectly, and the adaptive shielding is online. But sir, Roy's voice carried doubt, we're talking about going against an empire that has crushed civilizations for millennia. Are we really ready for this? Kane looked out at the stars, thinking of all the species that had tried and failed. The Coalition's strategy was always the same: overwhelming force, psychological warfare, and complete subjugation. They turned proud races into broken servants, their cultures erased, their spirits crushed. But humans were different. Earth had produced warriors who fought against impossible odds throughout history. From ancient battles to world wars, humanity had learned one crucial lesson: sometimes the only way to survive was to refuse to surrender, even when defeat seemed certain. Roy, patch me through to all human settlements, Kane ordered. His voice carried across dozens of colonies, mining stations, and research outposts scattered throughout the Outer Rim. This is Captain Marcus Kane of the Terran Defense Initiative. For 50 years, we've watched in silence as the Coalition destroyed entire civilizations. Today, we received word that the Sarah Prime is under attack. 3 billion innocent beings are crying out for help, and the galaxy's so-called protectors are the ones with blood on their hands. Kane paused, letting his words sink in across the human territories. They expect us to stay hidden, to accept their rule like every other species. They think we'll bow down because they have bigger ships and more weapons. But they've made one critical error in their calculations. His voice grew stronger, filled with the determination that had carried humanity through its darkest hours. They don't understand what happens when you corner a species that has never learned how to quit. The first strike changes everything. Phoenix emerged from hyperspace like a shadow given form. Unlike the massive, imposing vessels of the Coalition fleet, the human destroyer was sleek and predatory, its dark hull absorbing the light from the Sarah Prime's dying sun. On the bridge, Captain Kane studied the tactical display showing 12 Coalition heavy cruisers in orbit, their weapons systematically bombarding population centers below. Captain, we're being hailed, reported Communications Officer Lisa Chen. Her voice steady despite the overwhelming odds they faced. The main screen flickered to life, revealing the elongated features of Admiral Vexstar, the Coalition's most feared commander. His skin was pale blue, marked with ceremonial scars that denoted his victories over countless rebellious worlds. When he spoke, his voice carried the arrogance of 3 millennia of unopposed dominance. Unknown vessel, you are trespassing in Coalition space. Identify yourself immediately or be destroyed. Kane stepped forward, his human face filling the screen. For a moment, Vextar's expression shifted from irritation to curiosity. Humans were not supposed to possess interstellar capability, let alone dare to challenge Coalition authority. This is Captain Marcus Kane of the Terran vessel Phoenix. We're here to discuss the immediate cessation of your attack on the Sara Prime. Vextar's mandibles clicked in what passed for laughter among his species, a single primitive vessel against the might of the Coalition fleet. Your courage is admirable but misguided. Surrender now, and your species will be granted the privilege of servitude rather than extinction. Kane's response was calm, almost conversational. You know, Admiral, you're not the first person to underestimate humans, but you might be the last to make that mistake. What happened next would be discussed in military academies across the galaxy for centuries to come. The Phoenix didn't engage in the traditional battle formations that Coalition forces expected. Instead, it moved like a living thing, its adaptive hull shifting and changing as energy weapons struck its surface. Where Coalition vessels relied on massive shields and overwhelming firepower, the human ship fought like a boxer, dancing around its larger opponents while delivering precise, devastating strikes. Chief Engineer Blackstone monitored the ship's systems from the engine room, his hands flying across control panels as he rerouted power and adjusted the quantum drive's output. Kane, the adaptive armor is working perfectly. We're absorbing their energy weapon impacts and converting them to power our own systems. Lieutenant Park coordinated the weapons systems, targeting not the heavily armored hulls of Coalition ships, but their sensor rays and weapon mountings. Each strike was calculated to cause maximum disruption with minimal energy expenditure. Sir, we've blinded 3 of their vessels and disabled the main guns on 2 others. But the real shock came when the Phoenix began using tactics no Coalition commander had ever encountered. The ship released clouds of metallic particles that interfered with targeting systems, then used microjumps through hyperspace to appear in unexpected positions. What the Coalition saw as a single vessel was actually a constantly moving threat that seemed to be everywhere at once on the surface of the Sara Prime. The native population watched in amazement as their sky filled with explosions. The massive Coalition vessels, which had seemed invincible just minutes before, were now struggling against a single unknown ship that fought with techniques beyond their understanding. Admiral Vextar's confidence began to crack as his fleet took damage. Without landing a single effective hit on the human vessel, all ships converge on the enemy. Use Formation Omega-7 and prepare planet killer torpedoes. Kane's voice came back over the communication channel, still calm but now carrying an edge of steel. Admiral, you're about to learn why humans have a saying. It's not the size of the dog in the fight, it's the size of the fight in the dog. When legends become realitive, Coalition's planet killer torpedo streaked through space, its warhead capable of cracking a world's crust. It was their ultimate weapon, reserved for civilizations that refused to submit. But as the massive projectile closed in on the Sara Prime, something impossible happened. The Phoenix intercepted it, not with shields or weapons, but by ramming it at precisely the right angle to send it spinning harmlessly into the system's outer asteroid belt. Impossible, Admiral Vextar whispered, his voice carrying across the Coalition fleet's command channels. No ship can survive direct contact with a planet killer. On the Phoenix's bridge, Chief Medical Officer Dr. James Rodriguez treated the crew members who had been injured during the collision. The ship's advanced medical bay used technology that seemed almost magical compared to Coalition standards, rapidly healing wounds and treating radiation exposure with techniques developed during humanity's harsh early years in space. Captain, we've got multiple hull breaches on decks 7 through 9, but the self-repair systems are already working, reported damage control specialist Maria Santos from deep within the ship's superstructure. The Phoenix was healing itself, its living metal hull flowing like liquid to seal gaps and reinforce weakened sections. But the real turning point came when reinforcements arrived. Not Coalition reinforcements, but human ones. Ships began dropping out of hyperspace around the Sara Prime, each one different from the last. There was the Defiant, a heavily armored battlecruiser built in the asteroid mines of Ceres. The Intrepid, a fast attack ship constructed in the orbital shipyards of Mars. The Relentless, a stealth destroyer that seemed to bend light around its hull. Captain Kane opened a channel to the new rivals. "All ships, this is Phoenix Actual. Welcome to the party." The voice that responded belonged to Commander Jake Morrison of the Defiant. "Phoenix, this is the Terran Task Force. We brought some friends who wanted to see how this ends." What the Coalition fleet saw next defied every principle of space warfare. They had learned over 3 millennia. The human ships didn't form battle lines or attempt to match the Coalition's superior numbers. Instead, they fought as a pack, each vessel covering the others while exploiting weaknesses with surgical precision. The Intrepid used hit-and-run tactics, appearing long enough to launch a devastating salvo before vanishing into hyperspace. The Relentless became a ghost, striking from unexpected angles before disappearing again. The Defiant absorbed incoming fire like a fortress, its armor plating scarred, but unbroken as it protected the smaller vessels. Admiral Vextar watched, his fleet being systematically dismantled by an enemy that shouldn't have existed. Coalition doctrine assumed that all spacefaring species would develop along predictable paths, using tried and tested technologies that the Coalition had long since countered. But humans had taken a different approach, building ships that adapted rather than dominated, that survived rather than overwhelmed. "Sir, we're losing ships faster than we can coordinate responses," reported his tactical officer. "Their vessels are using combat algorithms we've never encountered. They're predicting our movements and countering our strategies before we can implement them." On the Sara Prime's surface, the native population watched in wonder as the massive Coalition vessels began to retreat. For the first time in living memory, their oppressors were fleeing. Children who had grown up knowing only fear began to laugh. Adults who had accepted defeat as inevitable started to hope. But Admiral Vextar had one final card to play. "All ships, prepare for tactical withdrawal. Send a priority message to the Nexus Council. Tell them we have encountered a new threat, possibly more dangerous than anything we have faced since the Great War." The surviving Coalition vessels jumped to hyperspace, leaving behind debris and the shocked silence of disbelief on the Phoenix's bridge. Captain Kane looked at the tactical display, showing clear space around the Sara Prime. "Sir, Lieutenant," Park asked quietly, "what do we do now? The Coalition knows about us. They'll be back with more ships, more weapons." Kane smiled, and for the first time in years, it reached his eyes. "Now we show the galaxy what happens when humanity decides to fight back." The galaxy watches in amazement news of the Sara Prime incident, spread through the galaxy like wildfire. In the slave quarters of Coalition worlds, whispered conversations spoke of a new species that had done the impossible. The Zalari warriors, who had been forced to surrender their weapons generations ago, began to remember what it felt like to stand tall. The Morthic engineers, their creativity crushed under Coalition rule, started sketching designs for weapons they had thought they would never build again. On the Coalition capital world of Nexus Prime, the Council of 12 convened an emergency session. The vast chamber, carved from a single crystal formation, had witnessed the subjugation of countless species. Today, it echoed with unprecedented concern. High Councilor Zethkara, eldest of the Coalition leaders, activated the holographic display showing the battle footage from the Sara Prime. "In 3,000 years of expansion, we have never encountered resistance like this. These humans fight with strategies we do not understand, using technologies that should not exist." Councilor Murden, military advisor to the fleet, gestured toward the tactical analysis. "Their ships are inferior in size and firepower, yet they defeated a full battle group. Our simulations cannot predict their movement patterns. It is as if they think differently than any species we have encountered." But the real concern came from Intelligence Councilor Yulaneth, whose species had evolved specifically to understand the psychological patterns of other races. The footage from the Sara Prime has been broadcast across 16 sectors. Slave populations are beginning to show signs of hope. Some are even beginning to resist. Meanwhile, in the Outer Rim territories, humanity was preparing for the storm. They knew was coming. The victory at the Sara Prime had bought them time. But everyone understood that the Coalition would return with overwhelming force. In the shipyards of Luna, Admiral Rebecca Stone oversaw the construction of humanity's next generation of vessels. Admiral, the Thunderbolt-class destroyers are ahead of schedule, reported Chief Constructor Paul Kim. The new quantum torpedoes are testing beyond specifications, and the adaptive shield technology is showing remarkable resilience. Admiral Stone nodded, her gray hair pulled back severely. As she studied the construction reports she had spent 30 years preparing for this moment, ever since the first human scouts had discovered the Coalition's iron grip on the galaxy. Paul, how many ships can we have ready in 6 months at current production rates? Maybe 30 vessels across all classes. But Admiral, the Coalition can field thousands. Stone smiled grimly. Then we'll have to make sure our 30 count. For more than their thousands, across human space, similar preparations were underway. On the mining world of Vesta, workers who had spent their lives extracting rare metals now forged them into armor plating. On the agricultural world of New Eden, farmers turned their knowledge of chemistry into explosive compounds. Every human settlement contributed to the war effort. United by a common understanding, failure meant extinction. But humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology or their determination. It was their ability to inspire others. On Coalition worlds, the footage from the Sara Prime played in secret, passed from being to being through hidden networks. The Zolari began holding clandestine meetings, their warrior culture slowly awakening from its enforced slumber. The Morthic started sabotaging Coalition equipment, using their engineering knowledge to create weaknesses that could be exploited. Later, Captain Kane, now promoted to Commodore, stood on the bridge of the new Phoenix, a ship twice the size of his original vessel, but built with the same philosophy of adaptability over raw power. His task force had grown to include vessels from a dozen human colonies, each ship reflecting the unique challenges of its birth world. Commodore, we're receiving a transmission from Nexus Prime, reported Lieutenant Park, now serving as his executive officer. It's being broadcast on all frequencies. The transmission showed High Councillors Efkara in the full regalia of Coalition authority. To the species calling themselves humans, you have committed acts of war against the lawful government of this galaxy. Surrender immediately, and your people will be granted the status of protected servants. Continue your rebellion, and we will demonstrate why the Coalition has ruled unopposed for 3 millennia. Kane considered the message for a long moment, then activated the reply channel. High Councillor, this is Commodore Marcus Kane of the Terran Defense Force. We appreciate your offer, but humanity has a policy regarding ultimatums from tyrants. He paused for effect. We don't negotiate with bullies. The birth of an empire built on freedom. 6 months later, the Coalition arrived at Earth with a fleet that darkened the solar system. 300 warships, including the massive dreadnought Inevitable, converged on humanity's birth world. High Councillors Efkara himself commanded the fleet, determined to make an example that would prevent any future rebellions. Humans of Earth, his voice boomed across all communication channels. Witness the price of defying the natural order. Your world will serve as a monument to the futility of resistance. But as the Coalition fleet moved into attack formation, something extraordinary happened. Ships began appearing throughout the solar system, dropping out of hyperspace in groups of 3 and 4. At first, Zefkara assumed they were human reinforcements, but the energy signatures were wrong. These vessels belonged to the Zolari, the Morthuk, the Vectani, and dozens of other species that had supposedly been pacified centuries ago. On the bridge of the Zolari warship Honor's Edge, Captain Krelthan opened a channel to the human fleet. Commodore Kane, this is the Free Zolari Navy. We stand with humanity. Similar messages came from the other allied vessels. The Morthic had brought their newly constructed battleships, designs that incorporated both their traditional engineering excellence and lessons learned from studying human tactics. The Vectani contributed their ancient knowledge of hyperspace navigation, allowing for coordinated jumps that put allied ships exactly where they needed to be. Zefkara stared at the tactical display in disbelief. This is impossible. These species were broken, their will to fight destroyed. Admiral Stone, now commanding the Terran fleet from the massive carrier Indomitable, responded to the Coalition leader's confusion. You made one critical error, counselor. You thought breaking someone's body meant breaking their spirit. But humans have learned something over our long history. The desire for freedom is like a fire. You can suppress it, contain it, even hide it for generations, but it never truly dies. All it needs is a spark. The battle that followed became known as the Liberation of Seoul. The coalition fleet, despite its overwhelming numerical advantage, found itself fighting not just humans, but a united force representing dozens of species. Each race brought its own strengths to the conflict: Zalari ferocity, Morthic ingenuity, Vectani wisdom, and human adaptability. The decisive moment came when Captain Kane, commanding a strike force of mixed human and alien vessels, penetrated the coalition's defensive screen and engaged the dreadnought Inevitable directly. The massive ship's weapons could have destroyed any single vessel in the Allied fleet, but it couldn't track targets that moved within human coordination while fighting with strategies that defied conventional military doctrine. All ships, this is Kane. His voice carried across the Allied fleet as they executed a maneuver that would later be called the Terran Gambit. Remember, we're not just fighting for our own freedom. We're fighting for every species that has ever looked up at the stars and dreamed of something better. Chief Engineer Blackstone, now commanding his own vessel, the technical Marvel Breakthrough, led a squadron that targeted the Inevitable's power core. Using Morthic engineering knowledge combined with human tactical flexibility, they penetrated defenses that had been considered impregnable when the dreadnought Inevitable exploded. Taking High Counselor's Afkara with it, the coalition fleet began to break apart. Some ships fled into hyperspace, others surrendered, and a few joined the Allied forces, their crews finally free to make their own choices. As the debris settled around Earth, Commodore Kane stood on the observation deck of the Phoenix, looking out at a sight that would have been impossible just a year before. Human ships flew in formation, with vessels from a dozen different species, all united under a new banner, the Terran Alliance. Admiral Stone joined him at the viewing port. So what do we do now, Kane? The coalition still controls most of the galaxy. Kane smiled, watching as Allied ships began coordinating search and rescue operations for both sides of the battle. Now we show the galaxy what an empire looks like when it's built on freedom instead of fear. Every species that wants to join us is welcome. Every world that chooses liberty over tyranny has our support. The Terran Empire had been born not through conquest but through inspiration. Within a generation, it would become the dominant force in the galaxy, but it would rule through cooperation rather than domination. And at its heart would always be the lesson humanity had learned in their darkest hour, that sometimes legends are born not from those who never fall, but from those who refuse to stay down.